I have been keeping records for 800,000 years, and I have never once written the words, "It is over." Not because I lacked the opportunity. There were moments, pauses between campaigns, years of silence, so long that younger species on the outer rim actually built civilizations inside them, raised children, invented religions, and died of old age before the next salvo came. We called those pauses the breathing. We never called them peace. Peace would have implied that someone had won. No one had won. No one remembered anymore what winning was supposed to look like. My name is Vexthal Orun. I carry the title of Battle Archivist, 3rd rank, assigned to the Coalition Fleet 7, Corridor 9, Outer Defensive Line. My body is old enough that the junior officers aboard this ship do not know what species I belonged to originally. I have been modified, repaired, and rebuilt so many times across 8 centuries of continuous service that even I am not entirely certain what is original anymore. My left sensory cluster was replaced after the Battle of Dorath 9. My memory cores were expanded after the massacre at the Velen Trench. My vocal modulator was installed sometime in the 400,000s, because the original one wore out from recording too many casualty reports in a row. I record everything. That is my function. That is what a battle archivist does. I watch the war, and I write it down, so that future generations will know what happened. The problem is that future generations stopped caring about what happened, somewhere around the 300,000-year mark. I kept writing anyway. It is the only thing I know how to do. The Coalition and the Drenok hegemony have been at war for so long that the original political dispute that started the conflict has been lost, buried under so many layers of subsequent grievances, counterattacks, retaliatory campaigns, and memorial battles fought specifically to honor the dead of previous battles, that no living historian on either side can tell you with confidence what the first shot was fired over. There are theories. There are always theories. One school of thought holds that it began over territorial rights to a mineral-rich asteroid belt in what is now Coalition space, Sector 44. Another theory suggests it was a diplomatic insult, something said at a trade summit that was taken the wrong way and answered with weapons fire before anyone could clarify. A third theory, popular among the younger Drenok scholars who occasionally transmit their academic papers across the neutral corridor, as if we might be interested in reading them, suggests that the war has no origin point at all, that it simply emerged from the accumulated weight of 2 expanding empires pressing against each other, the way that tectonic plates produce earthquakes, not from a single fault, but from the slow, inevitable pressure of enormous things that have no room to coexist. I find that last theory the most believable, and also the most terrifying, because it means there is no wound to close. There is no original argument to resolve. There is no moment we can point to and say, this is where it went wrong, and this is what we would have to undo to make it right. The war is not a mistake. The war is simply what happens when 2 powers of approximately equal size decide, over a period of 800,000 years, that the only way to exist is to fight. We have destroyed 41 homeworlds between us. I have the records of all of them. I have the atmospheric composition of each planet before impact, the population counts at the time of destruction, the names, where names were known, of the commanding officers on both sides who gave the orders. I keep those records because someone should. I keep them because if I stop keeping them, those 41 worlds become nothing. Just coordinates. Just numbers on a map that no one looks at anymore. On the day everything changed, I was doing what I always do during quiet periods between engagements. I was updating casualty projections for the next expected Drenok push along the outer corridor. Fleet Command had intelligence suggesting the hegemony was massing forces 2 sectors east of our current position, and the admirals wanted estimates. How many ships would we lose in the first wave? How many in the counteroffensive? What was the acceptable threshold before we needed to request reinforcements from the interior fleets? I was running those numbers when my primary scanner returned an anomaly. I looked at it for a long time before I allowed myself to react, because in 800,000 years of war, anomalous scanner readings have meant exactly 3 things: equipment malfunction, debris from a recent engagement drifting into sensor range, or a Drenok decoy designed to pull our attention toward a false target, while the real strike comes from a different angle. I have seen all 3 so many times that I no longer experience anything resembling alarm when a reading comes in wrong. I simply begin the diagnostic process and wait for the data to clarify itself. The data did not clarify itself. It stayed anomalous. It stayed precise. It stayed exactly where it appeared to be, which was the neutral corridor, the strip of unclaimed space between our fleet's forward position and the nearest Drenic line. That corridor had been technically neutral for about 60,000 years, maintained by mutual unspoken agreement because neither side found it strategically useful enough to fight over. Things did not appear in the neutral corridor. Nothing ever came from there, because nothing ever went there. There was nothing to go there for. But something was there now. I ran the scan 3 times. I checked my equipment diagnostics. I cross-referenced the reading against the secondary scanner array, which uses a completely different detection architecture to guard against exactly this kind of false positive. The secondary array agreed with the primary. Both of them were looking at a single vessel, small enough to register as large debris, sitting in the middle of the neutral corridor with its position lights on. Position lights, as if it wanted to be found. I sat with that for a moment. Debris does not turn on its lights. Decoys do not sit quietly in the open and announce themselves. Whatever this was, it was not malfunctioning, and it was not trying to trick us. It was simply there, waiting. I opened a channel to the vessel, using our standard coalition hailing frequency. No response. I tried the secondary frequency, the emergency frequency, the civilian traffic frequency, a relic from before the war when there used to be civilian traffic in this sector, and the general broadband pulse we use when we have no idea who we are talking to, and we simply want to make contact with anything capable of receiving a signal. The broadband pulse got a response. Not a voice, not a visual, not a standard greeting in any language I had on file. And I have on file every language spoken by every species encountered by the Coalition in 800,000 years of expansion. What came back was a set of coordinates. Our coordinates. The precise location of Fleet 7's forward command ship, down to the meter, returned to us as if to say, I know exactly where you are. I always knew where you were. I am not hiding. I sat very still for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Then I picked up my recording instrument, opened a new log file, and wrote, Day 1 of something I do not have a category for yet. I had no idea how accurate that would turn out to be. The junior communications officer on my deck, a young Kethrani named Vel, 17 cycles into her first assignment, looked over at me from her station with an expression that mixed professional curiosity with the early edges of something less comfortable. Archivist Orun, she said carefully, what do we report to command? I thought about that. In 800,000 years, I had reported battles, retreats, treaties that fell apart before the ink dried, and the deaths of 11 different fleet admirals. I had a protocol for all of those things. I had forms, filing systems, standardized language designed to communicate information without creating panic. I did not have a form for this. Tell command, I said slowly, that we have a contact in the neutral corridor. Single vessel, small. Origin unknown. Behavior unknown. Tell them it is not Drenic. Vel hesitated. How do you know it is not Drenic? I looked at the scanner reading again. At the precise, deliberate set of coordinates it had sent back to us. At the way it sat in the open without any attempt at concealment or aggression. At the patience of it, sitting there in the corridor that no one ever used, with its lights on, waiting. Because, I said, the Drenic have been fighting us for 800,000 years. And in 800,000 years, neither of us has ever done anything that looked like this. Vel opened the channel to command. I sat in my chair and looked at the scanner, and felt something that I had not felt in so long that it took me several minutes to identify it. I felt curious. That might not sound like much. Curiosity is not exactly an adrenaline rush. It is not the same as fear, or excitement, or the cold professional readiness that a soldier feels before an engagement. But for a being who had spent 800,000 years watching the same war repeat itself in slightly different configurations, curiosity was extraordinary. Curiosity meant something new was happening. And in 800,000 years of the same war, nothing new had happened. Until now. The vessel in the corridor did not move. It did not respond to anything else we transmitted. It simply sat there, patient in a way that nothing in this sector had ever been patient before. And it waited for us to figure out what it was. I began pulling old records, survey logs from the outer rim, contact reports from the early exploration period, before the war consumed every available resource, and exploration became a luxury neither side could justify. I was looking for something, anything, that matched the profile of this ship, the size, the signature, the general shape of the energy readings it gave off. I found something on the 467th search. A record from roughly 9 centuries back. A coalition survey ship, operating in what was then unmapped territory, in an unremarkable arm of the galaxy, far from the front lines. The record was brief, filed by an explorer whose name I recognized distantly from a footnote somewhere, and it described a small, organically populated world. Nothing unusual. The galaxy is full of them, and a species on that world that the explorer assessed as non-strategic. Non-strategic. That was the term we used when a species was not advanced enough, not numerous enough, or not positioned well enough to matter to the war effort. Non-strategic meant noted and ignored. It meant, we know you are there, and we have decided you are not worth the time. The species in that record had been given a designation in the coalition taxonomy. The explorer had also included their own name for themselves, as a footnote. They called themselves humans. I stared at that word for a very long time. Then I looked back at the scanner, at the small vessel sitting patiently in the neutral corridor with its lights on, and I felt a second thing I had not felt in a very long time. Dread. Not the combat-adjacent alertness that comes before a Dreadnought strike. Something quieter, something colder. The specific dread of a person who realizes they may have misread something important a very long time ago, and is only now beginning to understand what that misreading might have cost. I opened a new section in my log file. I wrote, "They were never non-strategic. We just never bothered to find out." Command's response to Vel's report arrived in 11 minutes, which for a military command structure the size of the coalition was nearly instantaneous. What that speed told me was that someone in the upper tiers of Fleet 7 had seen the anomaly on their own scans before we even reported it, and had been waiting, braced maybe, for confirmation from an archivist who knew how to read what they were looking at. The response was simple. It said, "Hold position. Do not engage. Do not transmit further. Wait for Admiral Holt's authorization before any next action." Admiral Holt. I had worked with 6 different officers who held that rank during my time with Fleet 7, and the current one, a composed, methodical commander named Edith Holt, who had been running the Corridor 9 defensive line for about 12 standard years, was, in my experience, one of the least likely admirals I had ever served under to do something rash. That she was the one they wanted authorizing the next move told me Command was thinking very carefully about what the next move should be. I kept watching the scanner. The vessel kept waiting. In 900 years, I thought, no one had gone back to check on the humans. In 900 years, we had never once asked whether non-strategic was a permanent condition or a temporary one. And now something was sitting in our neutral corridor with its lights on, knowing our coordinates, and all I had to explain it was a single survey note from a distracted explorer who had not thought a species living on one small world in an unremarkable arm of the galaxy was worth a second look. I found myself hoping, very quietly, that we had not just made the kind of mistake that does not survive being discovered. Vel looked at me again from across the deck. She was young enough to still look to senior personnel for reassurance during strange situations. I could see her searching my expression for some signal that this was manageable, that this was something we had a protocol for, that the archivist, with 800,000 years of records behind him, had seen something like this before and knew how it turned out. I gave her the most honest look I could manage. I had not seen anything like this before. No one had. That was exactly the problem. The Dreadnought spotted it too, of course. They would have been negligent not to, and whatever else you could say about the Dreadnought after 800,000 years of war, you could not accuse them of being negligent. Their nearest forward position was roughly equidistant from the vessel in the corridor, and within 20 minutes of our initial detection, I began picking up their scanning activity. The particular energy signature of Dreadnought long-range sensors sweeping the corridor with the kind of focus that meant their archivists were doing exactly what I was doing, looking at the records, searching the taxonomy, trying to find a category for something that did not fit any existing category. I wondered if they found the same survey note. I wondered if they felt the same thing I felt when they read it. The vessel still did not move. It still did not transmit anything beyond those coordinates it had sent back to us. It simply existed in the middle of the corridor, between two of the most powerful war fleets in the history of the known galaxy, and it was not scared. That was the part that kept returning to me as I sat at my station updating my logs with everything I was observing. It was not scared. It was not attempting to project confidence or aggression to mask fear, the way that smaller vessels sometimes did when they stumbled into contested territory by accident. There was no bravado in its transmissions because there were no transmissions. There was no defiance in its positioning because it was not positioned defensively. It was just there, comfortable, patient, as if waiting were the easiest thing in the world. As if waiting beside two opposing war fleets that had together destroyed 41 worlds were no more remarkable than sitting at a window watching weather change. I wrote in my log, "I do not know what this species has been doing for 900 years. I wrote, "But I do not think they have been sitting still." And then I closed the file, because I needed a moment to sit with that thought alone before I put any more of it into the official record. Outside the viewport, across the dark of the neutral corridor, a small ship with its lights on waited. And for the first time in 800,000 years, I had no idea what was going to happen next. Admiral Edith Holt arrived on my deck 40 minutes after command sent her authorization code. She walked the way she always walked, which was with complete deliberate calm, as if she had decided some years ago that whatever happened around her, she personally was not going to be visibly rattled by it. I had watched her deliver news of catastrophic fleet losses with that same settled posture. I had watched her authorize desperate holding maneuvers under heavy fire and never once seen her hands shake. Her hands were not shaking now either. But when she looked at my scanner display and saw the vessel sitting in the corridor, she was quiet for a moment longer than her usual processing time. "How long?" she said. 53 minutes since first detection," I said. "No movement. No additional transmissions since the coordinate response." She looked at the old survey record I had pulled up on my secondary screen, the one with the word humans in it. She read it twice. "Non-strategic," she said, in a tone that I recognized as the tone people use when they are re-evaluating something they should have re-evaluated long before now. "That was the original assessment," I said. 900 years ago." She nodded slowly. Then she straightened and looked at the corridor again. "Get me everything we have on them," she said. "Everything. Every survey note, every contact record, every incident flag from the outer rim, going back to the original cataloging." "I already started," I said. She looked at me. "What did you find?" I had found 4 incident reports, buried in the lower-tier archive files that no one looked at anymore, because they predated the current phase of the war and were considered irrelevant to current operational planning. 4 incidents in which coalition scouting vessels had made contact with human craft in deep space, in the unremarkable arm where their world was located. All 4 reports were brief. All 4 were filed under minor incident, no strategic consequence. All 4 had been assessed, noted, and forgotten. All 4 described the human craft as having departed the encounter intact. None of the coalition scouting vessels had. I told her this. Admiral Holt was quiet for 4 full seconds, which for her was a very long time. Then she said, very carefully, "No one thought to follow up on that." It was not a question. "No," I said. "No one thought to follow up." She turned and looked at the scanner one more time, at the small, patient, quietly lit vessel in the corridor between our fleet and the Drenok line. "Get me a direct channel to the Drenok Forward Command," she said. Vel looked up from her station, startled. In 800,000 years of war, you could count on one hand the number of times Coalition Command had opened a direct, unsecured channel to a Drenok officer. It was the kind of thing that got people court-martialed under normal circumstances, because it implied the possibility of negotiation, and the Coalition had a very old, very official policy about what negotiation with the Drenok implied about the loyalty of whoever attempted it. Edith Holt looked at Vel with an expression that made perfectly clear she was aware of all of this, and had already decided it did not apply to the current situation. "Get me the channel," she said again. Vel got her the channel. I sat at my station and looked at the scanner, and thought about 900 years of a species we had written off in a single survey note, out there in an unremarkable arm of the galaxy, doing something, learning something, becoming something. And now they had sent one ship. One small ship, with its lights on, to a war that had been running for 800,000 years. I thought about what kind of species sends one ship to a place like that, with no fleet behind it, no armed escort, no visible backup of any kind, and waits. I thought about what it means to not be afraid. Not the false fearlessness of something that does not understand the danger, the real kind, the kind that comes from understanding the danger completely and having already worked out, somewhere quiet and private and internal, that it does not change anything. I looked at the scanner. I wrote in my log, I think we made a mistake 900 years ago. I think we looked at something small and decided it did not matter. I think we were wrong. The Drenok commander who answered Edith Holt's channel was a senior officer named Brak Vel Osen, a hegemony fleet marshal whom I recognized from his service record as one of the longest active commanders on the Drenok side, old enough to have served in the same war era I had been archiving for the last 3 centuries. He did not seem surprised to receive the call. He seemed, if anything, slightly relieved that someone on our side had made the first move toward communication, as if he had been waiting to see who would break first. He looked, in other words, as unsettled as I felt. "Admiral," he said, in the translation-modulated voice that our communication systems automatically rendered into standard coalition speech. "You see it too." "I see it," Edith said. A pause. "Do you know what it is?" "We have a working hypothesis," she said. Another pause. Longer this time. "So do we," he said. "And I suspect our hypotheses are the same." They looked at each other across 800,000 years of war, across the digital space of an open channel that both of their governments would have tried to shut down if either government had been told it was happening. 2 old soldiers from opposite sides of the longest conflict in recorded history. The small ship with its lights on sat between them in the corridor and waited for them to catch up. "What do we do?" Brackvell asked. Edith Holt looked at the scanner one more time. Then she looked at me, and I could see in her face that she was asking the archivist the question she never asked in any other situation. What does history say about this? I thought about it for a moment. History does not say anything about this, I told her honestly. Nothing like this has ever happened before. She nodded, as if that were somehow the answer she needed. She turned back to the channel. "We wait," she told the Drenok Marshal. "We hold our positions, and we do not provoke it, and we see what it does next." Brackvel Osum looked at her for a long moment. "And if it does something we do not know how to respond to?" Edith Holt's expression was very still. "Then we learn," she said. I wrote that down. I write everything down, but that one I wrote slowly, because I wanted to get it exactly right. Then I saved the file, closed the entry, and went back to watching the scanner. The ship in the corridor had not moved. It was still waiting. And somehow, without knowing anything about it, without having any category for what it was, or what it wanted, or what it was capable of, I already knew that it had all the time in the world. Because something that is not afraid does not rush. It waits until the other side is ready. And then it moves. I want to be precise about what I found, because precision is the only thing standing between history and legend, and I have spent 800,000 years fighting to keep this record from becoming legend. What I found in the Coalition archive were not dramatic revelations. They were quiet ones, the kind that are almost worse, because they do not arrive with any fanfare to soften the impact. They arrive in footnotes, in the lower tiers of the filing system, in incident reports submitted by survey officers who were probably embarrassed by what happened, and wrote their accounts in the most neutral procedural language they could manage, hoping no one would look too closely. I looked closely. The first incident was catalogued approximately 840 years ago, in the early period of what the Coalition classified as Outer Rim Survey Expansion. A 3-ship scouting formation had been operating in the unremarkable galactic arm where humanity's homeworld was located, mapping navigation corridors and assessing resource potential. According to the report, the formation encountered a human vessel of unfamiliar design in open space. Standard contact protocol was attempted. The human vessel did not respond to protocol. When the lead scout moved to intercept for a closer inspection, the human vessel produced what the report carefully described as an energy discharge of undetermined type. that disabled the lead scout's propulsion and communications simultaneously, without damaging the hull or harming the crew. The human vessel then waited for 12 minutes. Then it transmitted a single message in a language the coalition translators had never encountered before, departed at a speed the damaged scout could not match, and was gone. The report concluded, incident assessed as non-hostile territorial warning. Species lacks sufficient technological base for strategic concern. Recommend monitoring at 600 cycle intervals. No monitoring occurred at 600 cycle intervals. No monitoring occurred at all. The second incident was filed 790 years ago. Similar context, similar region of space. This time a single coalition vessel, on a resource survey, encountered 2 human craft. The human craft did not initiate contact. When the coalition vessel attempted to scan them for assessment, both human craft simultaneously blocked the scan, using a countermeasure the survey officer described as a field of undetermined composition that our instruments could not penetrate. The officer attempted a second scan. The human craft blocked it again. The officer, apparently deciding that this was interesting rather than alarming, attempted a third scan. This time, one of the human craft produced a scan of its own, pointed directly at the coalition vessel, and returned a complete reading of the vessel's interior, its crew count, its power core specifications, its cargo, its navigation logs, to the coalition officer's own display screen, as if to say, "We can do this. We are choosing not to. You should think about what that means." The coalition officer filed the report under minor contact, non-aggressive. Species demonstrates unexpected sensor capability. Recommend review. Nobody reviewed it. The third incident was the one that should have changed everything. 620 years ago, a coalition border patrol, 3 armed vessels, not survey ships, actual military craft, operating in the far outer rim, they encountered a human vessel that was larger than the ones in the previous records. Not large by coalition standards, not large by Dreadnought standards, but larger than anything humanity was supposed to have built by that point, given the pace of development the survey data suggested. The patrol commander, a woman named Captain Lena Carr according to the filing header, attempted standard military contact protocol. No response. She moved her formation to a blocking position. The human vessel altered course smoothly, and without apparent urgency to go around the blocking position. Carr matched the course change and moved to block again. The human vessel went around again. This happened 4 times. On the 5th attempt to block, the human vessel stopped. Carr reported that it sat there for approximately 30 seconds. Then it targeted all 3 patrol vessels simultaneously, with a weapons system she could not identify, fired a precision shot that removed every offensive weapon from each of the 3 ships without touching anything else. No hull damage, no propulsion damage, no crew injury, and then resumed its previous course and departed without ever having transmitted a single word. The 3 disarmed patrol vessels returned to base and filed their reports. The report was flagged for review by Senior Tactical Command. Senior Tactical Command reviewed it. Senior Tactical Command reclassified the incident as equipment malfunction, probable energy discharge from vessel core causing weapons system failure, human vessel incidental to incident, no threat assessment warranted. Because the alternative, the accurate interpretation of what Captain Lena Carr had actually described, was too difficult to place inside the existing framework for how the coalition understood the universe. In the existing framework, non-strategic species stayed non-strategic. Small species stayed small. Things that were noted and dismissed in a survey report 900 years ago stayed dismissed. The idea that a species you had written off in a footnote had spent 9 centuries becoming something you could not match was not a comfortable idea. It was the kind of idea that, if accepted, required a complete re-evaluation of your assumptions. And re-evaluating assumptions, for military command structures engaged in an 800,000-year war, is not something that happens easily. You cannot run a war of that scale on assumptions that shift. Certainty is the foundation, even when certainty is wrong. So the reports were filed, and the classifications were applied, and the incidents were slotted into the lower tiers of the archive where nothing important lives, and everybody moved on. And humanity kept doing whatever humanity was doing out in the unremarkable arm of the galaxy where nobody was paying attention to them. I found the 4th incident 3 hours into my search. buried so deep in the archive that the file format had degraded, and I had to run a reconstruction algorithm to make it readable. It was from 410 years ago. No patrol ships this time. No survey vessels. What the report described was a Dreadnought incursion, a hegemony assault force that had pushed through a gap in the outer defensive line and driven deep into unmapped territory before our forces managed to cut off their supply lines and force a withdrawal. During that withdrawal, the Dreadnought force passed through the galactic arm where humanity lived. The Dreadnought did not file any reports about what happened there. The Coalition had no direct record of the engagement. What I found was an intercepted Dreadnought communication, one of thousands that Coalition intelligence regularly captured and archived, that had been translated and filed under miscellaneous intercepts, no operational value. The intercept was a message from the Dreadnought Assault Force Commander to Hegemony High Command. It said, in translation, "We have passed through the system designated non-strategic in survey records. We did not pass through quietly. We have sustained losses I am not yet able to fully account for. The species in this region is not what our records indicate. I am requesting updated intelligence and a revised threat assessment before any future operations in or near this arm. I am also requesting, with respect, that command explain why our records on this species have not been updated in 9 centuries. There was no record of Hegemony Command's response. There was no record of anyone on either side doing anything with that information. I sat with this for a long time. 800,000 years of war, both sides fighting each other with everything available, consuming entire worlds in the conflict, building and losing and rebuilding entire fleets, across a timescale that dwarfs every other war in recorded history. And in the middle of all of it, tucked away in an unremarkable arm of the galaxy that neither side had ever found strategically important enough to contest, a species that both sides had looked at once, said, "Not worth our time," and walked away from. A species that had spent 400 years, minimum, demonstrating to the rare visitors it received that it was operating on a level neither side had been paying attention to. A species that had watched 2 of the most powerful war fleets in history grind against each other across 800 millennia, and had apparently decided, in its own time, in its own way, that it had seen enough. I thought about the ship in the corridor, the lights on, the patient waiting, the coordinates returned with no other message, because no other message was necessary. We know where you are. We have always known where you are. We are choosing, right now, to be here instead. I thought about what Captain Lena Carr had described 400 years after the first incident. 3 armed ships, disarmed without a single casualty, while the human vessel continued on its way without a word, not a warning, not a threat, a demonstration. A very precise, very deliberate demonstration, performed with the unhurried confidence of something that had already done the math and knew it was not going to need to do it again. And then I thought about something else. Something that had been forming at the edge of my thinking for the past several hours, taking shape slowly from everything I had been reading, everything I had been logging, all the quiet accumulation of incidents and reports and filed away evidence of a species that neither side had ever bothered to monitor closely enough. Why now? Not why were they here. I thought I understood that, or at least I understood enough. The question was timing. 800,000 years of war, 900 years since the first contact, 4 centuries since the intercepted Dreadnought message that no one followed up on. Why was the ship in the corridor today, specifically? What had changed? I pulled my scanner data from the past 18 months and started running comparisons against historical patterns, looking for something that might serve as a trigger. Some escalation in the war, some shift in the balance of the front lines, some event large enough to cross whatever threshold humanity had been watching and waiting for. I found it in 11 minutes. 42 standard months ago, Coalition Fleet 3, operating on the Western Front, had conducted a campaign that resulted in the destruction of a Dreadnought colony world with a civilian population of approximately 400 million. The Dreadnought had responded 8 months later with a retaliatory strike on a Coalition population center that resulted in comparable losses on our side. The exchange had escalated through a series of counterstrikes over the following year, and the current projections suggested the next phase of the Western Front engagement would involve targeting of both sides' deep core worlds, the inner systems, the population centers that had not been directly struck since the early centuries of the war. The projections were not secret. Military projections of this scale are never truly secret. Both sides know what the other side is planning, more or less, because both sides have been fighting each other long enough to recognize the patterns. Humanity had apparently been watching those projections too. And at some point, in some room I would never see, some human somewhere had looked at the numbers and the trajectories and the scale of what was coming and had made a decision. Not our decision, theirs. Not about the war itself, exactly. About whether the war was going to be allowed to continue reaching the scale it was currently reaching. I stared at the scanner, at the small ship with its lights on. One ship, no fleet, no visible backup. Sitting in the corridor between two forces that had spent 800,000 years perfecting the art of organized devastation, and it was calm about it, and it was patient about it, and it was so clearly, so completely unafraid, that it made the hair on my remaining biological parts rise, without any clear understanding of why my body knew before my mind did what I was looking at. I opened a channel to Admiral Holt. "I think I know why they are here," I said. She came to my station and listened while I walked her through everything I had found. The incidents, the intercepted Dreadnought communication, the Western Front projections, the timing. She listened with the same composed attention she gave to all briefings, and when I finished, she was quiet for several seconds. "They are not here because of us specifically," she said slowly. "They are here because of the scale." "That is my assessment," I said. "They watched us escalate to a point where the projected losses crossed a threshold they were not willing to allow." "Yes." Another silence. "And they think one ship is sufficient to address that." I looked at the scanner. "They sent one ship," I said carefully. "That does not necessarily mean one ship is all they have." Edith Holt went very still for a moment. Then she said, "No, I suppose it does not." She straightened up and looked at the corridor screen for a long time without speaking. I could see her doing the same mental arithmetic I had been doing, running the same comparisons, arriving at the same conclusion from a slightly different angle. 800,000 years, she said finally, quietly, almost to herself, and we never went back to check. "No," I said. She turned and walked back toward the command area of the deck, and I heard her say to Vel, behind me, "Get me a second channel to Brackvel. We need to talk about the Western Front projections. Both of us do." I turned back to my station. The ship in the corridor had not moved. It was still waiting, still patient, still completely unafraid, and I found myself thinking, sitting in that chair with 800,000 years of records behind me, and no record at all for what was happening right now, that there was something almost like mercy in the way it waited. Something in the patience itself, the refusal to rush, the decision to give us time to see it clearly before anything else happened. That was, if you looked at it correctly, the kindest thing anyone had done in this war, in longer than I could calculate. It was waiting for us to be ready. It was waiting because it understood that we were not, yet. And it had decided, without being asked, without being obligated to, that we deserved the chance to get there. I wrote that down too. Then I set it aside, because what I wrote next was going to be harder, and I needed to be ready for it. The ship in the corridor was about to stop waiting. I could feel it, the way you can feel a change in atmospheric pressure before a storm, not with any specific instrument or measurable data point, but with the accumulated instinct of a being who has spent 800,000 years watching events approach their pivot points. Something was about to happen, and unlike every other thing that had happened in 800,000 years of this war, I did not know what it was going to be. The Dreadnought fired first. I want to record that clearly, because clarity matters in moments like this, and the temptation to let events blur in the retelling is always strongest when the events are moving fast. The Dreadnought fired first. Not Fleet 7, not Admiral Holt, not the Coalition. The hegemony's nearest forward command vessel, a Dreadnought heavy cruiser, designated in our tracking system as Target 874, opened fire on the vessel in the neutral corridor, approximately 3 hours and 22 minutes after the vessel first appeared on Coalition scanners. I was watching when it happened. The shot was decisive. A full-power primary discharge from the cruiser's main weapons array. The kind of shot that Dreadnought heavy cruisers use to crack open coalition battleships. Not a warning shot. Not a ranging shot. A real one, aimed center mass at the small human vessel sitting in the corridor. I had time, in the fraction of a second between the discharge and the impact, to think, that is the end of this. It was not the end of this. The shot hit. The energy readings confirmed impact. The small vessel took the full force of a Dreadnought heavy cruiser's primary discharge, and my scanner showed, for one very strange second, a bloom of redirected energy, spreading outward from the point of impact, in a pattern I had never seen before. Not dissipation, not absorption, something in between. The energy received, processed, and then released outward in a controlled wave that touched nothing in the corridor except, briefly and precisely, the instrument arrays of every vessel within scanner range. Every ship in the corridor, Coalition and Dreadnought both, experienced a momentary instrumentation disruption. A flicker. 3 seconds, maybe 4. Not enough to matter, tactically. Not enough to cause any real confusion. Just enough to make every single crew member on every single ship check their instruments and verify that their equipment was still working. A demonstration. Again. A very specific, very deliberate demonstration. You fired at us. We received it. We returned the energy to the corridor in a way that touched your instruments without harming them, because we wanted you to know we could have done otherwise, and we chose not to. Then the human vessel fired back. One shot. Not at the Dreadnought heavy cruiser. Not at any of the warships. The shot was aimed at the star, the mid-sequence star at the center of this system, unremarkable, like everything else out here, burning steadily, as it had for billions of years, without caring about the war being conducted in the space around it. The shot entered the star's outer layer and produced an effect. I am an archivist. I record what I observe. What I observed was a precisely shaped solar flare, emerging from the point of impact at an angle calculated. I understood this immediately and with complete, cold clarity, to intersect specifically and only with the Dreadnought fleet's current formation, not the Coalition fleet, not the neutral corridor itself, the Dreadnought formation, where their ships were clustered most tightly, where their power systems were running at combat-ready levels that made them most vulnerable to electromagnetic interference. The flare hit the Dreadnought formation, and every Dreadnought ship in the forward line lost power. Not destroyed, not damaged structurally. The hulls were intact, the crews were alive, the ships were dark and drifting, and completely without function, propulsion or weapons or communications, floating in the corridor like very large, very expensive pieces of debris. I counted the ships. 14 Dreadnought heavy cruisers, 22 escort-class vessels, the forward command ship, 37 warships in total, representing a significant fraction of the hegemony's presence in this corridor, all of them dark and silent and harmless. All of this had taken less than 40 seconds. I sat very still at my station. I was not the only one. The deck around me had gone completely quiet. I heard no voices, no movement, no sound from any of the crew members at their stations. Everyone was watching the same readings I was watching, and everyone was doing the same internal calculation, the same process of measuring what they had just seen against everything they believed about how combat worked, and what it could produce, and what was possible. The human vessel did not follow up. It did not target the disabled Dreadnought ships. It did not shift to target the Coalition fleet. It returned to its previous position in the corridor, turned its position lights back on. They had gone off during the exchange, and waited. That was the moment. That was the thing I keep returning to, hours later, still logging, still trying to put into the archive the truth of what I observed. Not the solar flare, as extraordinary as that was. Not the energy redirection, which represented weapons technology I do not have any existing category for. The thing I keep returning to is what came after. The fact that it stopped. The fact that 37 disabled Dreadnought warships were floating in the corridor, helpless, and the human vessel did not press the advantage, did not destroy them, did not make an example of them in the way that every military doctrine in 800,000 years of recorded warfare would have said was the logical, strategic next move. It stopped. It returned to its position. It turned its lights back on. And it waited. Vel made a sound at her station that I think she was not fully aware of making. It was a small sound, involuntary, The kind that escapes when the body registers something before the mind has processed it. I did not look at her. I kept my eyes on the scanner. "Archivist Orun," she said, very quietly. "I know," I said. "They could have." "I know," I said again. Admiral Edith Holt had been watching from the command position at the center of the deck. I did not need to look at her to know this. I could feel the quality of the silence from her direction, the particular weight of it. After a long moment, she walked to my station. She stood beside me and looked at the scanner displays, at the 37 disabled Dreadnought ships, at the human vessel sitting patient and lit in the corridor between us. "It is not done," she said. "No," I agreed. "It is communicating." She nodded once. "What is it saying?" I thought about that. About the precision of the shot into the star, the exact calculation required to produce a flare of that specific shape and size and direction. About the choice to target the Dreadnought ships specifically, the ones who had fired, and not us, who had not. About the choice to disable without destroying. About the choice to return to position afterward and wait rather than pressing forward. "It is saying," I said slowly, "that it knows exactly what it is doing. It is saying that what happened to the Dreadnought forward line was a choice, not a limitation. It is saying that it could have made a different choice, and it wants us to understand that it is making this one deliberately." Edith Holt was quiet for a moment. "And the waiting," she said. "After." "The waiting is the same message," I said. "It is still waiting for us to be ready. It did what it had to do to get our attention, and now it is waiting again, because it has decided we deserve the time to process what we just saw before it requires anything from us." Another long silence. Through the corridor screen, I could see the lights of the human vessel, steady and patient in the dark between two fleets. "It is merciful," Edith said. Not a word military commanders use often. Not a word that sounds natural, coming from the command deck of a warship. She said it the way you say something true, that you have no practice saying aloud. "Yes," I said. "I think it is." Brockvel Osam's channel opened without warning. His image appeared on the secondary screen, and the first thing I noticed was that he looked different from the composed, calculating officer who had spoken to us 3 hours ago. Not frightened exactly, but changed. The way a person looks when something has crossed the line between intellectually alarming and viscerally real. "Your instrument arrays," he said without preamble. "The flicker. We experienced it too," Edith confirmed. "I need you to understand what our scanners showed during that discharge," he said. "What was returned to us in those 3 seconds? Our weapons inventory, our power cell capacities, our crew count by deck, our shield frequencies." He paused. "Our communication encryption keys." Silence on our deck. "It returned your encryption keys," Edith said carefully. "In the first pulse, passively, the way you might hand someone a document you picked up off the floor and return it to them without opening it. Except," he stopped, "except the document was sealed. Our encryption is not passive. It requires," he stopped again. "We do not know how it accessed that data. We do not know when. We do not know if it has been accessed before." I wrote this down. I wrote it exactly as he said it, because the precise wording was important. "Returned it to them without opening it." The implication was not that the human vessel had failed to open it. The implication was that it had opened it, had read what was inside, and had then folded it neatly and given it back, sealed as they found it. As a courtesy. As a demonstration of restraint. As the specific and very precise kind of message you send when you want someone to understand the distance between what you could do and what you are choosing to do. "Admiral Holt," Brockvel said. He had difficulty for a moment finding the next words, and for a Dreadnought fleet marshal, difficulty finding words was as remarkable as everything else happening in the corridor right now. "I have been fighting this war, in one capacity or another, for 400 years. I have engaged every known type of coalition weapon system. I have studied the tactical history of this conflict back to the earliest records my government maintains. I have never," he stopped, "I have never seen anything like this." "Neither have I," Edith said. "What does it want?" he asked. I looked at the scanner, at the patient vessel with its lights on. I thought about 400 years ago, a Dreadnought assault force passing through the galactic arm where humanity lived, and the message their commander sent home afterward. The message that said, I am requesting that command explain why our records on this species have not been updated in 9 centuries. I thought about the Western Front projections, the escalation timeline, the calculations someone, somewhere, had done about what was coming and what needed to change. I think, I said slowly, and both of them turned to look at me, the Coalition Admiral and the Drennock Marshal, looking at the archivist, that it wants the same thing it has always wanted, for as long as we have been ignoring it. And what is that? Brockvell asked. For us to stop, I said. A pause. Stop what? Edith asked quietly. I gestured at the scanner. At the disabled Drennock ships. At the corridor that 2 fleets had been facing each other across for centuries. At everything the displays showed about the disposition of the war that was waiting on the other side of this moment. All of it, I said. Nobody spoke for a while. The human vessel's lights were steady. It was still waiting. The channel opened on its own terms. I want to be clear about that too, because the framing matters. Neither fleet hailed the human vessel. Neither Admiral Holt nor Brockvell Osum sent a request for communication. The channel opened because the human vessel decided it was time for it to open, and there was nothing either fleet could have done to prevent it or to make it happen sooner. They were ready when they were ready, and not a moment before. The face that appeared on every display in Fleet 7 simultaneously, and I confirmed later, on every display in the Drennock Forward Fleet as well, broadcast to both sides at once without any prior coordination or request, was a human face. It took my biological recognition systems a moment to process it, because humans are not a species I had calibrated for, and the last image in the Coalition archive of a human being was 9 centuries old and taken from a survey drone at a significant distance. This image was close and clear, a human woman, older, with the particular quality of stillness in her face that I had begun, over the past several hours, to associate with humanity in general. Dark eyes, gray threading through her hair, the kind of face that has made a great many decisions and does not find the current one unusually difficult. She looked at the camera for a moment, and I had the disorienting sensation, probably shared by every crew member watching their displays on both fleets, that she was looking specifically at me. I am Captain Claire Okafor, she said. Her voice was calm, not performed calm, not the professional composure of a military officer managing their reactions under stress. Just calm, the way a deep river is calm, not because nothing is moving, but because the current is too strong to look turbulent from the surface. I represent an authorization of the Unified Human Governance Council. I want you to understand that this message is being transmitted simultaneously to both fleets and to your respective high commands. We are not speaking to one side. We are speaking to both of you together, because the problem we are here to address does not have 2 sides. She paused, not a pause for effect, a pause that felt like she was giving translators time to keep up. I have been monitoring this conflict for 11 years, from various distances, she said. My crew has been monitoring it longer. The Council has been monitoring it since the incident 4 centuries ago, when a hegemony force passed through our region and discovered that their records about us were out of date. A small, quiet thing crossed her face that I thought might have been the human expression for something like wry recognition. Your records are still out of date. I am not here to correct that today. I am here because the projections for the next campaign cycle include the targeting of deep core worlds on both sides, and the projected losses at that scale cross a threshold that the Council has identified as unacceptable. Brockvell's voice came through the side channel he still had open to us. Unacceptable to them, he said quietly, not to Okafor but to Edith. Yes, Edith said. On what basis? Marshal, Edith said, and there was something in her tone that made him stop. Not challenge, just quiet emphasis. 37 of your ships are dark in the corridor right now. I think the basis has been demonstrated. He was silent. On the main channel, Claire Okafor continued, as if she had heard none of this, which she probably had. We are not asking for a permanent peace treaty, she said. We understand that is not something that happens in a single conversation after 800,000 years. What we are asking, today, is for a cessation of offensive operations against population centers, both sides, immediately and without exception. What happens to the front lines after that is a conversation for another time. This is the specific and limited request we are making, because it is the specific and limited action that addresses the immediate threshold the Council has identified. She looked directly at the camera again. The Drennock ship that fired on us was acting on what I assume was an assessment of threat. I understand the logic. I want you to understand that what happened to those ships was our minimum response. It was not our maximum response. We want that understood not as a threat, because threats are for conversations where the parties are uncertain of the power balance. We are past that point. We want it understood as a clarification. You know where we are now. You have some sense of what that means. We would prefer that this conversation continues on the basis of that clarity. She folded her hands in front of her, in a way that communicated nothing aggressive and everything final. You have 6 hours to respond, she said. We will remain in the corridor. The channel closed. The deck was very quiet again. I looked around at the crew members at their stations. Vel, the navigation officers, the tactical analysts, the communications technicians, all of them sitting very still, with expressions that varied in detail, but shared the same core quality. The look of people who have just been informed, gently and without any actual malice, of a thing they had not previously allowed themselves to understand. Edith Holt said nothing for a long moment. Then she opened the ship-wide channel. All crew, this is the Admiral. I want every senior staff member in the operations room in 20 minutes. Bring your threat assessments and your data, and bring honest thinking. That is all. She closed the channel and looked at me. Archivist, she said. What would you advise? In 800,000 years, flag officers had occasionally asked me that question. Not often. Archivists record, we do not typically advise. The occasions when I had been asked were unusual ones, and the question always meant the same thing. I need someone to say the true thing out loud, because everyone else in the room has too much invested in one outcome or another to say it plainly. I thought about Claire Okafor's face, about the stillness in it that was not emptiness but depth, about minimum response, said the way you state a mathematical fact. I thought about the Western Front projections and what they meant for the planets that had not yet been targeted, the worlds full of people going about their lives inside a war so old that they had been born into it the same way they were born into the gravity of their homeworlds, not chosen, not questioned, simply the condition of their existence. I thought about 41 homeworlds already gone. Admiral, I said, in 800,000 years, we have destroyed 41 worlds between the coalition and the hegemony. Neither side has won. Neither side has lost. Neither side has, in the entire duration of this conflict, done anything other than continue. We have continued so long that continuing has become the same as existence. We do not know how to be something other than at war. She listened. I am the battle archivist, I said. My function is to record what happens. I record battles and losses and strategies, and the deaths of admirals and the destruction of fleets, and the names of worlds that no longer exist. I have been doing this for 800,000 years, and I have never once, in all that time, been asked to record the end of this war. Because the end never came. Because neither side could produce the conditions for an end. I looked at the scanner, at the patient lights in the corridor. Something that has been here for 9 hours, I said, has produced more conditions for an end than 800,000 years of this war have produced in total. I think, Admiral, that the honest thing to record is that we have been waiting for something external to change the equation, because we cannot change it ourselves. I think this may be that thing. I think what it is asking for is small enough to be possible and large enough to matter. And I think that in 6 hours, if we send it anything other than agreement, it will do something else. And the something else will be as precise and as controlled and as carefully graduated as everything it has done so far. And at some point, the graduation will reach a level that we will not be able to negotiate from. Edith Holt stood looking at me for a moment. Is that your recommendation? Yes, I said. It is. She nodded once. Then she walked toward the operations room, and the senior staff followed her, and I stayed at my station, because the station needed monitoring, and because I had things to write. I wrote for most of the 6 hours. I wrote everything I had observed, every log entry, every data point, every moment I had found notable in the past 9 hours. I wrote about the lights on in the corridor, and the coordinates returned without a word, and the 4 incident reports in the archive that no one had followed up on. and the intercepted Dreadnought communication that no one had acted on, and the Western Front projections, and Captain Lena Carr's 3 disarmed patrol ships, and the solar flare shaped like a decision. At 4 hours and 50 minutes, Vel came to tell me that Admiral Holt had reached an agreement in principle with Brak Vel Osum on a joint response. At 5 hours and 40 minutes, a preliminary accord was drafted. Not a peace treaty, not a ceasefire in the broader sense. Exactly what Claire Okafor had asked for, and nothing more. A cessation of offensive operations against population centers, effective immediately, pending a structured dialogue about next steps. 800,000 years of war, and neither side had ever produced a document like that between them. They produced it in 6 hours, because something small and patient with its lights on in a corridor had made it clear, without cruelty, without destruction, without a single loss of life on either side, that the alternative was something that nobody wanted to be the one to experience. At 5 hours and 58 minutes, with 2 minutes to spare, Fleet 7 transmitted the accord to the human vessel. The response came back in seconds. Not coordinates this time, not the encryption keys or the weapons data or any demonstration. Just 2 words in standard coalition translation, the simplest possible acknowledgement. Thank you. I wrote that down. Then I held the writing instrument over the log for a moment, because there was something else I needed to write, and I was trying to find words for it that were precise enough. I wrote, "In 800,000 years, this is the first entry I have made that I am genuinely uncertain how to categorize. It does not fit in the record of battles, because no battle occurred. It does not fit in the record of treaties, because no war has officially ended. It does not fit in any existing category I have constructed or inherited across 8 centuries of archiving. I am going to create a new category. I have not yet decided what to call it. I am considering several options. I am considering intervention. I am considering contact, genuine. I am considering something shorter, something that does justice to the precise nature of what I observed. A species that was small enough to overlook, and patient enough to wait, and capable enough to make the waiting matter. I have not decided. But I know, sitting here in this chair with the scanner showing a quiet corridor, and 37 Dreadnought ships slowly coming back online, as whatever the human vessel had used on them, dissipated at a rate I also do not have a category for, that I have found the word I want at the center of whatever I call this. The word is enough. Someone looked at 800,000 years and decided, enough. That is what I observed today. That is what I will record. The human vessel left at the end of the 6th hour, 6 minutes after receiving Fleet 7's transmission. It did not broadcast a departure announcement. It did not transmit a farewell. It simply reversed its position lights in a way that my instruments interpreted as a kind of acknowledgement. Not a wave exactly, but something in the physics of the light frequency change that felt like one. And then it moved, and within 40 seconds it was beyond the range of our long-range scanners. Gone. I watched it go on my display until there was nothing left to watch, and then I watched the empty corridor for a while, because I was not ready to stop yet. The disabled Dreadnought ships were coming back online slowly, one by one. I could see their power signatures returning, tentative at first and then steadying, the way instruments behave when they are running diagnostics to confirm that everything is still where it belongs. The crews inside those ships had been alive through the whole thing, uninjured, sealed in darkness for several hours, with plenty of time to think about what had happened to their ship and what it meant. I thought about what that time in the dark must have felt like. Not fear, probably. The situation was too unusual for a standard fear response to fully engage with. More like what you feel when something that should have been simple turns out not to be. And the non-simplicity is not frightening so much as it is enlarging. The sudden awareness that the universe contains things you had not previously included in your model of it, and that your model needs to grow to fit. Brackvel's channel opened one more time. He looked, in whatever small way his alien physiology allowed him to look this, tired. "The accord will hold on our end," he said, without any preliminary. "I cannot speak for High Command's long-term interpretation, but I can tell you that every fleet marshal who was watching the corridor today will make the same recommendation I am making, which is that we honor it. The coalition's position is the same," Edith said. She had returned to the command deck after the operations room meeting, and she stood now the way she always stood, steady, certain, but with something changed in the quality of the certainty. It was no longer the certainty of someone who knows the shapes of all the threats they face. It was the certainty of someone who has decided, in the face of something genuinely new, to act with integrity and see what comes of it. "I want to say something," Brackvell said. He paused, organizing it. "I have spent 400 years studying the history of this conflict. Coalition military history, and Drenok records both, insofar as I have been able to access them. I have read the accounts of every major engagement, every failed diplomatic attempt, every atrocity committed by both sides across 800 millennia. I have spent 400 years trying to understand a war that is older than recorded civilization for most species in this galaxy." He paused again. "In all of that time," he said slowly, "I have never once read an account of anything changing without a body count attached to it. Every shift in the course of this war has cost something enormous. Every movement toward anything other than more war has required a loss large enough to force the change. The Velen Trench, the fall of Dorath. Every time something altered, it was because something catastrophic made alteration unavoidable." He looked at Edith. "Today," he said, "something changed, and I am looking at my crew manifest, and my ship status, and my casualty count for this engagement, and the number is 0. Edith Holt was quiet. "0, he said again. 800,000 years of war, and something changed, and no one is dead." He let that sit for a moment. Then he said, "I do not know what to do with that, but I wanted to say it out loud, because it deserves to be said, and I think you are the right person to hear it." Edith nodded. After a moment she said, "I think the archivist should record it." They both looked at me. "I already have," I said. Brackvell's channel closed, and we were looking at an empty secondary screen. I turned back to the scanner. The corridor was very quiet. Disabled Drenok ships slowly waking up, 2 fleets holding position. Something fundamental had changed, and no one had quite found the language for what had changed yet. Vel came to stand near my station. "Archivist Orun," she said. "What happens now?" I had spent 800,000 years answering that question with more war, more casualty projections and battle analyses, and fleet movement logs, and the names of worlds that no longer existed. I did not know what the answer was this time. But I knew the answer was not more war, and knowing that, for the first time in 800,000 years, felt like standing in an open space so large and so unfamiliar that the body does not know whether to be afraid of it or grateful for it. I settled on grateful. "I do not know," I told Vel honestly. "I genuinely do not know." She nodded. "Is that bad?" she asked. I thought about Claire Okafor's face on the screen, calm with the depth of someone who has done the thinking and arrived at a conclusion she believes in. About the position lights in the corridor, steady and patient. About minimum response, and the encryption keys returned sealed as a courtesy. About a species in an unremarkable arm of the galaxy that 2 empires had both decided was not worth the time, and what that species had apparently decided to do with the time given to them instead. "No," I said. "I think not knowing what happens next is exactly what it is supposed to feel like." I looked at the scanner one more time. The corridor was clear. The human vessel was gone. The Drenok ships were coming back online. Fleet 7 was holding position, quiet and still. And somewhere in an unremarkable arm of the galaxy, a small ship that had spent a day in the middle of 2 ancient enemies and changed something enormous about the geometry of the universe was heading home. I opened a new file. I titled it, Day 1 After, and then I began to write. I wrote about the position lights and the patience, and the coordinates returned without explanation. I wrote about Captain Lena Carr and her 3 disarmed ships, and the incident report that everyone had filed, and no one had followed up on. I wrote about the solar flare shaped like a choice, and the encryption keys returned sealed, and 37 ships that sat in the dark for 6 hours with 0 casualties. I wrote about 2 fleet commanders from opposite sides of an 800,000-year war, looking at each other across a channel that both their governments would have tried to prevent, and agreeing on something. I wrote about Vel asking what happens now, and not knowing the answer, and being, for the first time, genuinely glad not to know. I wrote about the word I had chosen for the new category I was creating in the archive. I did not go with intervention. I did not go with genuine contact. I went with something else. Something I kept returning to, no matter how many alternatives I tried. because it was the most accurate word for what I had observed. The category was possibility. Because what I had watched today was not a battle, and it was not a negotiation, and it was not the end of a war. Not yet. What I had watched was something rarer and harder to define, something that 800,000 years of the same conflict had made almost impossible to imagine. I had watched something become possible that had not been possible before. That is what one small ship had done, sitting in a corridor with its lights on. Not by force, though it had the force. Not by threat, though the power was evident, but by the specific and quietly extraordinary act of arriving, and waiting, and demonstrating clearly that there was another way, and then giving the people on both sides of the oldest war in recorded history the time and the space to see it. I wrote for several more hours. The ship's systems cycled through night shift protocols around me. Vel was relieved by the evening communications officer and went to sleep. Admiral Holt retired to her quarters after walking the deck one more time in that quiet, deliberate way of hers, checking each station the way you check on things you are responsible for. The corridor was still quiet when I finally stopped writing. I saved the file, labeled it clearly, cross-referenced it with every related incident report and archive record and scanner log from the day, and flagged it at the highest priority level in the Coalition archival system, the level reserved for events of civilizational significance. Then I did something I had not done in 800,000 years of keeping records. I opened the old casualty projection files, the ones I had been updating when the anomaly first appeared on the scanner, the ones estimating losses for the next Drenuk push along the outer corridor, the expected body count for the next phase of a war that had been producing expected body counts for longer than most species had been in existence. I deleted them. Not archived, not reclassified, deleted. Because casualty projections are documentation of a future that has already been decided, and the future, for the first time in 800,000 years, had not been decided. It was open. I sat in my chair in the quiet of the end of the shift and felt the weight of 800,000 years behind me and nothing certain ahead of me, and I did not know what to call the feeling, but I knew it was not the feeling of a being who has spent his existence watching the same thing repeat. Outside in the corridor, there were no threats, no movements, no incoming formations, no escalation, no expected campaign next cycle or the cycle after. Just space. Open, unmapped, uncategorized space. And somewhere out there in the dark, in an unremarkable galactic arm that two empires had spent 9 centuries deciding was not worth their attention, a small ship was going home. I thought about what to write at the end of the log, some closing statement appropriate to the scale of what I had just recorded. 800,000 years of war, and the first day of something else. And then I decided the simplest thing was the truest thing. I wrote, I am curious what comes next. I saved the file. I closed my station. And for the first time in 800,000 years, I went to sleep, not knowing what the morning would bring. It was the best sleep I had ever had.